Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the KTG podcast. So, the mission of my podcast, as you may know by now, is for us to realize that we have access to our very own power to gracefully navigate and glide through changes and manage transitions in our lives. And those changes and transitions could be whether you're changing practice areas, careers, buying or selling a business, retiring, quote unquote, or really reinventing your life path, going back to school, or maybe you're dealing with a health crisis or a diagnosis or anything else in your life that precipitates a change. So we are all great and we can rise above any change. And we can be even greater than any of these changes, importantly, by thinking, how can I bring this greatness to the world through a brand? So I do this podcast for two reasons. One, I really care very deeply about humanity, and I want us all to see how great we really are so we can be happier and sleep better at night and make more money. And two, because I struggle with my own feelings of being less than, just like anyone else. And some days it's good and some days it's not. But today is a really good day because this time I have a very special guest for you. I have Scott Herndon, and Scott is the principal of his own law firm in Berkeley. He is a plaintiff trial lawyer, and his focus is catastrophic personal injury, civil sexual assault, and employment law. And super interesting, as I'm going to have Scott share with you in a minute, for those of you who think, I'm just a lawyer, quote unquote. Scott is also a professor. He has a PhD in literature and philosophy. So, welcome, Scott. I'm happy to have you here today.
Hi, how are you? Great
I
to
am.
be here.
Thanks. Really happy to have you. So, Scott, I always think about how I know my guests, and you and I were introduced through a mutual client of mine up in Berkeley, and that's how I know Scott. And I've known you like
Eight
less
months?
than a year,
Yeah.
right?
hmm
Yeah, probably 8 or 9 months. So tell us your story. What should we know about you? I'm sure everybody's fascinated about your background because we don't often find writers who are lawyers. We should find more of those people, but I don't know that many, and maybe my audience doesn't either. So tell us about you.
Oh, well, I guess I should just start by thanking you for everything that you've done for me, helping me understand how my background um, kind of works with my current career as an attorney. What your coaching has helped me talk about my past and my background in a way that makes sense for my current career. So I really appreciate that. So my path to law um, it was winding. I started out as a fiction writer, and um, when I was in college, my dad made the mistake of telling me that he would help me out with grad school, but he wouldn't help me out if I got a job. And so I quickly figured out that if I stayed in grad school, I could write fiction and I could manage to survive. And so I wound up meandering through a master's program in analytic philosophy at Colorado at Boulder. Decided I didn't really like that, but I was working on my first novel at the time. Became a journalist for a while in New York, and then I wound up getting a position at NYU in their PhD program when you could study with philosophy and literature at the same time. And I just kept on writing and that led me to teaching at UC Santa Barbara and Stanford and a whole bunch of places.
Now,
And
before you tell me more, what about writing fascinated you so much from such a young age that you, like you said, you kept on writing? Because I don't think
Mhm.
everyone thinks about that art, and it truly is an art, in my opinion, the same. So, for those of my listeners who are lawyers who are like writing, I write because I have to in my briefs, or I write because my coach tells me I have to journal. Uh, Explain to them what about writing works so well for you.
well, for me, my family is they're all artists first of all, and they all interact with the world in oblique ways that aren't really satisfied by mathematics or engineering. And for me, writing was a way for me to kind of engage with them, but
Mm.
also it gave me the freedom to dream reading and writing. I grew up in a very small farm town in Central California, and for me, it let me, you know, access the adventure of my mind and what I really cared about as a person. And philosophy and fiction just satisfied something in me that um, I just had to do it. I don't know. I can't explain why, but it was um, my form of expression. It wasn't painting or sculpture or something like that. It was
That is
writing.
just beautiful. I hope for you guys who are listening to this, you can find that for yourself. As you will find as you listen to Scott more and more today, he has a gift for verbally putting things so beautifully. I've told him that all through our coaching work together. So I'm going to turn these into show notes, but I just love what you said. I had to write it down. Writing gave me freedom to dream and access the adventure of my mind. And I just think we should all sit and think about that. How do you access the adventure of your mind? Like, where does most people don't even put those concepts together, which is why I think that is your unique selling proposition that makes you so special, that you have the capacity to really think and be in that sense. And I think that's what also makes you a superb lawyer because you took that skill set and brought it into being. So I just wanted to reiterate that or just bring it to light for those listening who are going, I'm not creative. I can't access the adventures of my mind. What do you say to people like that? Lawyers
Uh,
like that?
yeah, I don't believe them. First of all, I mean, I taught writing uh, at many universities, and um, writer's block or the belief that you cannot write it's a true misconception any more than you can't imagine or you can't understand how someone sitting across the table might have a different perspective. So my first novel, I was trying to figure out what happened to my parents' relationship, and I started to try to write through fictional characters from the perspective of both of my parents. And all I was trying to do was to, you know, find some empathetic perspective from a position of conflict that allowed me to see what their humanity was. And,
That's amazing. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to stop you again right there because that is such a tool. I hope you see that, and I hope as you're listening, you see what he's saying. We always say, be able to see somebody else's perspectives, have compassion, step into somebody else's shoes. But I think people don't know how to do that, right? They're like, how am I supposed to do that? I'm opposed to that view, or I'm angry at that person, or I have had parents, like you said, and I, not to get into your specifics, but like people, we've all had parents that have quote unquote done us wrong, or what we would have liked to have had it done differently. But you use writing as a tool in the fiction sense to access that ability to see the other side's perspective. Am I framing that correctly?
yeah, I mean, it's really just it's scary for people to open up and to understand um, that whether it's opposing counsel or a person who has done something mean to us or something that struck us the wrong way, it's scary to inhabit their mind for a moment and figure out how that person got to that place. But that's the fictional impulse, and that's what the value of fiction really is. Um, so that, at least to me anyway, it's a way of getting at a sort of shared emotional truth that you just don't you can get through a painting or even a film, but because of the way that language is strung together, you have the time that it takes to inhabit someone else's perspective. It makes a difference, I think, ethically, emotionally, um, and it helps you. It helps me anyway. It helps me improve the way that I treat people.
Amen. I mean, so well said. And if any of you are listening and want to have improvements in how you treat people, that's a change, that's a transformation. Check it out. Listen to what Scott's saying and give it a try. Okay, so now back to your story, but I just had to stop and highlight that because there's so much to unpack. There's so much wisdom, and I just don't want the listeners to just gloss past it. So, as a professor, then, how did you end up becoming a lawyer? Is what I'm sure everyone's thinking.
Well, so I think the key here. So actually not a professor. I was a lecturer, and
Okay.
so what that basically means is that when I came to Stanford, I had a full teaching load with faculty responsibilities, but I wasn't on a tenured track. And
Ah.
so when I my son was born, I had a choice in my life. I could continue to write these novels that I found really personally fulfilling, that were kind of formally challenging. They don't read like bestsellers. They're you know avant-garde in some cases. So I had 3 years to write another book, market it, and see if it would sell, or I could take a scholarship to go to law school. And I taught for about 10 years, and I just felt like it was a practical decision for me to see um, what life would look like outside of the university. And I think it was the best decision that I could have made at the time.
And I just want to applaud you for making that change. Like I said in my intro, this podcast is all about having the listeners embrace their own version of change by hearing other people's stories who have successfully done it. And, everyone can argue what success looks like, but in my opinion, because I picked the guests, right? And so that was a big transition, and it took a lot of courage, faith, in my opinion. And sounds like you actually weighed it pragmatically through your left linear brain as well and came up with an analysis that made sense. I just want everyone to think about when you're at a crossroads and trying to figure out what to do next, you can use your left brain and your right brain and come up with a solution that may seem like there's no answer and we don't know what it's going to hold, but it's definitely worth a shot, because what's the worst that can happen? So there was no worst that could happen. So now you did go to law school and you've been running the firm. And like I said earlier, your practice areas are what they are. And so, what I want to loop back around, is there anything else about your story that you think we should know before I go to the article?
Well, just I mean, for me, it was a practical decision. Uh, you know, Anybody who takes pride in what they do, it's these kinds of changes in your life are very, very difficult to pull off. And for me, it was a very difficult transition. My first final exam, I remember getting back in law school, and next to a grade that I'd never gotten before in my life, the professor wrote, "This sounds like you think you're still a professor." So it was it took me a while to get used to the new humility of being a first year law student in my mid 30s. But I now am very happy that I got through that tough phase, and I'm in a good place.
Fantastic. What a great story. I never heard that from you. Yeah. And it makes it really clear that we all have to pivot and redefine our roles, because your role was as a professor or lecturer up until then. And then your role shifted and you became a student of the law, but the person is still the same. That's what I'm always trying to get people
Mm-hmm.
to see. We have an identity that's about who we are as a human being and our story of where we come from, our origin, but the roles can differ and change, and that's a good thing, and that's allowed. I'm reading a beautiful book. I'm sure you've read it. The Finite and Infinite
Oh,
Games
sure.
by James Carse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, for those of you who have no idea what we're talking about, check it out. James Carse, Carse, and he talks about roles and differentiations, and about how some play the short games, some play the long games, what I call the finite and infinite games. And I think your perspective is about the infinite game, and really like seeing it from a bigger picture perspective, that it's not just professor or lawyer or lecturer or lawyer, it's pivoting and evolving and maturing as a human that's being, rather than just doing things because, well, I have my PhD, so I must do this forever. I just want to highlight that because it's a really good example. We often talk about that with change and transition, but I'm not sure people get it, that their brand is not constant, it's evolving. And
Yeah,
yours is.
the way that I would think about it is, that each stage of life, it's a your life should be a double helix, that like a strand of DNA, that at each stage of life, there should be a shift where you take on a new responsibility or a new role. You're a young parent, you're a new student, you take on a new skill, and you start from scratch. But once you start to obtain a little bit of expertise, you get better at being a parent. The helix spins again, and so there's the way to accomplish growth that's not parallel in form, that where you get to be a beginner and an expert and an expert and a beginner, and as you move through life, um, hopefully all of these textures come together in something that looks like wisdom. But it may not be wisdom, it may just be an accumulation of memories and beliefs and values that you've experienced from both sides.
Amen. Well said. Sometimes I just want to put you, Scott, somewhere and just have you talk just about whatever subject you want to talk about, and I will glean some wisdom from it. It's amazing. So, okay, now to the article. I think it's a good pivot point to the article. So, Scott and I were emailing, and he had interviewed these attorneys, and I'll let him talk to you about this, but for this article, and he sent it to me, and I thought the article was fascinating, and it really focused so well on this topic of change and growth. And so I said, would you be willing, Scott, to come on my podcast and share your wisdom about this article? And the article has not been published yet, right, for Plaintiffs Magazine, or is it?
It's coming out in July. Yeah.
Okay, so if you were listening to this anytime before July of 2022, it hasn't come out yet, but afterwards it's available in Plaintiffs Magazine. And it's called The Geometry of Growth, which is all about change and transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conversations with trial lawyers on their practice. And Scott references this concept of fractals, which I'm going to let him talk about. And I've referenced fractals a lot, and I find them fascinating. But I'm going to read the beginning paragraph of his article because I think it's so well said, and then I'm going to let him talk to you about the wisdom that he got from the interviews. But the way he summarized them is fantastic. And the concept is every successful law firm needs to understand this history, present challenges, and future of its growth. It needs to know why and how its clients decided to retain the law firm in the first place. And it needs to analyze, resolve, and argue its cases successfully. It needs to hire and manage the right kind of partners, lawyers, and staff. And it needs to find ways to pay for its overhead, invest in its future, and sustain the ethos and values that gave it life in the first place. Imagining, planning, and executing these elements together is the art of a successful law firm. Beautiful. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not a lawyer, I don't run a law firm, in my opinion, and Scott, you confirm this or deny this, you can insert any kind of a business that you're running or any kind of a undertaking you're taking that is about growth. It doesn't have to be a law firm. It just so happens that we're both lawyers, and so it was relevant. So with that, Scott, can you take us through the lessons in the article and how you even came up with that idea for the interviews and the fractals?
Well, so yeah, so the idea is that the idea of the article is that a business, a law firm, a career, um, over time, is really just an accumulation or compounding of small decisions. And what I'm calling in the article a fractal is really just a small decision that repeats itself over time. So, but what's really important for the article, I think, is that decay is also a form of growth, quote unquote. That
Mm.
um, um, uh, if bad decisions are multiplied over time, there's a kind of a process or a picture of those that you could almost draw on a piece of paper that would show why something wasn't working. So, but to stay positive, I think what I wanted to focus on with this article was um, how tiny decisions accumulate over time and can provide us with pictures of the success of the law firms that and the partners that I interviewed for the article. And so to explain what a fractal is really quickly, if you look at the frond of a fern, or if you look at the shape of a hurricane, or if you look at a kaleidoscope, what you're really looking at are thousands and thousands and thousands of small processes that have simply been repeated and expanded. That's what we'd call the geometry of biological growth, or you see it in physics or all over the place, really.
But I think it's most prevalent for people who look into fractals in nature. Those serve as the best examples of what we find every day when we're just looking for it. Those tiny things that seem
Mm-hmm.
like they're, oh, when we look at something that's small, we automatically think, well, that's irrelevant because of its stature and its size. But I think those tiny decisions, like you said, form the entity, right? And patterns and repetition
Mm-hmm.
are part of nature, and that's how life evolves and shifts, right? As a form of growth.
Yeah, absolutely. That growth is really a symptom of millions of um, tiny decision points or tiny behaviors. Um, that's really what the teaching value of fractals is, I think.
Yes. So tell us how you applied that to the article and what you gleaned that we could learn from you.
Well, so I just, it's a simple idea. It's fantastically described in Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow. What I was really looking for was, as my own law firm was growing, I was looking for some mentorship, and so I reached out to some of the best attorneys that I knew, and I just wanted to ask them simply, if they had to boil down to the success of their firms to one or two simple values, what would they say? What would they think? And the question was so interesting in the way that people answered, because though there were a few answers that were similar, many of them were stunningly different. And so I learned a lot by writing the piece.
So, what surprised you the most from the stunningly different answers?
Well, I interviewed Doris Chang, who's an absolutely incredible attorney at Walkup here in San Francisco. And when I asked her what core value she had as an attorney, her answer was um, trying to be responsive to the changing conditions of modern life.
Mm.
That's really what why she's been successful, is that with each change in technology, the way we communicate, um, the cars that we drive or that drive us now, that her challenge is to stay abreast of those developments and understand how that impacts her clients and her own legal practice.
That
And
is so. Go ahead. I thought. Go ahead.
it's just it's such a youthful perspective that I just admire so much, because so many of us get into a practice area that we know cold, and we ossify. Our practice becomes rigid, and to be that young at heart, to say, hey, this is new and this is challenging, and I need to keep up with it. Um, to me, that sounds a lot like a joyful career. So I appreciate that.
Well said. Indeed. I really believe in that wholeheartedly. When we get into any activity, and I relate to that lawyer example so well, we're like, okay, I'm here. I now know what I'm doing. I know enough to not worry about it every day. I'm just going to keep doing the same thing over and over again. Right. And let's not talk about the definition of insanity and all that stuff, but it just becomes rote. And I think people can sense that, and we sense that, and we become numb to life, and we lose our faith that there's a bigger picture orientation out there, and we stop looking for it, right? And then change is not possible anymore for us because we're not out there even prospecting or even dreaming or imagining. Oh, I love that word imagination, as you started this conversation with about it. And that's when law firms stagnate and there's no growth. And it always reminds me, what you said in her perspective always reminds me of Blockbuster, right? that
Hmm.
example of Blockbuster, how they just refused to see what was coming. And they said, nope, videotapes are going to be the future. Just like Motorola. I used to love my flip phone. I wish they'd, evolved, as did Blockbuster. And I just always will remember those two concepts of those two companies that were doing so well. And then they just did not modernize, as Doris said, and would not evolve because it's scary, because the comfort zone of sitting where you are and knowing that I'm a good lawyer, I've been trained, and I can keep doing this, and I should see results, and it should just bring me success. It doesn't always apply because, as you so well said, growth is a symptom of tiny decisions and behaviors, and modernization. Would you call that a tiny behavior? I don't know, but it
Well, I
certainly is.
think, sorry to cut you off. I
No,
think
go
to
ahead.
me, the part that's provocative is there's a tiny decision that takes place within every legal mind that, for instance, the idea that we should be risk managers, and like that's not like that, a good portion of what we do as lawyers is managing risk, and
Mhm.
so what can happen is if risk management as a value get gets to run free, all there's a point where you stop seeing, um, possibilities, and you start only, and that's why we want to be experts, is we want to minimize risk to our clients, minimize risk at trial. And in the Blockbuster case, the risk, perhaps it's possible that risk management became so, it grew to such a point that systemic risk, like is described in Nicholas Taleb's The Black Swan, was just not something on the radar. And so, like a funnel, all of these tiny decisions to preserve the company in the face of what it considered to be a stable system were incredibly in themselves risky, because there was something else on the horizon in the form of streaming video that perhaps, I don't want to speak for anyone in any company, but maybe it was probably an important, decision point at some point, what to do with
Yeah.
the company. So
Well said.
anyway, yeah, that's one of the answers. What Doris's was what really provocative to me.
And I think everyone listening can stop then and apply that to your own life and to your own practice or to your own career, whatever you're doing. Is how are you taking that definition of risk management and still willing to grow and shift, instead of becoming so risk averse and rigid that, the fear, which is really, I look at life as a spectrum. There's fear on one side and love on the other. Love is not mushy romantic love. Love is just, the effects of love in business are that you show up for your clients, you show up for opposing counsel, you care about your practice, you care about your employees, you are generous in your time and your community outstanding effort. So there's those two sides of that spectrum. And risk management oftentimes pushes us all the way to the fear spectrum and doesn't allow us to evolve and show up as our greater brand and self, and to grow and shift. So I want to talk about one other person's, perspective. You met with Tom. How do you pronounce his last name for me?
Paoli.
Paoli.
Hmm.
And can you talk about what he said and what you gleaned as his core fractal value and how we can learn from that?
Well, Tom had Tom is an emotive, charming, joyful person, and, I think that, we talked about so much. I don't want to actually attribute something to him that wound up with someone else. Can you remind me what triggered
Of
you in
course,
the,
of
yeah.
course. I just once you read the article, everyone, you'll see how Scott did such a beautiful job of summarizing this. But the conversation with Tom, you gave his core fractal value is strive to grow your law firm by embodying your aspirations and values in each aspect of your practice,
Oh,
and
right. Yeah.
that
So
seems very important.
very, very important. And what Tom did for me was that he gave me a book called Visionary Business. Um, and I was I was asking Tom about how he had grown his career, and he stopped me and he said, "Well, do you have a business plan?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "For your own law firm." I said, "Of course I don't have a business plan. I mean, I think I know what I'm doing, but," he's like, "you need to read this book and then write a business plan." And so I read this book, Visionary Business, and it's unlike any business idea of a business plan that you've ever read before. It's highly personal. It's it's about taking care of people. It's about making decisions based on um, the right the right call at the right time. It's not the bottom line for profit, and that sort of thing. It's a really truly incredible book.
I recommend that then, and we'll put it in the show notes. Visionary Business. And I think what's so important is that concept of visionary business, and what Tom was talking about is that there is way more to life and to business and to practices and careers than just profit. Profit is, as my coach calls it, a
Mm.
lag indicator.
Yeah.
And if you're really showing up as what I hope to work with my clients, that really you embody and you own your value and what your dreams are and your vision is, in every part of your practice, whether that's managing your clients or paying the bills or taking care of your staff and employees, that cannot fail. But that presupposes that everybody's willing to really stop and look at that for themselves. And it's an uncomfortable process. You know that from working with me. Every time I say to people, it's not comfortable. I don't want you to be comfortable. If I'm that comfortable person for you, then I'm failing you, because then you're really not taking who you are and really turning it upside down and applying it so that people can really find you and see that authentic side of you that makes you so attractive.
Well, for me,
So
I really like that. I mean, a lot. I I would think of profit as a symptom, not just a lagging indicator. So if you think of profit as a symptom,
true.
there's a great book by this uh, philosopher named Slavoj Žižek called "Enjoy Your Symptom." It's a and but what's so great about this book and about the phrase "enjoy your symptom" is that if profit is something that happens to us because of the way our firms have grown and what we've done and our tiny decisions, um, how awful would it be not to be able to enjoy it, right?
Amen.
I mean, and there's so many people who have gotten to this point where they've achieved everything that they ever could have dreamed, and yet it's not making them happy. And
Mhm.
so that's what the value of my discussion with Tom was all about. Is that if that endpoint isn't going to be something that you're proud of and that you enjoy, you know, what the heck was that business plan for anyway? So but word enjoyment is a heavy word. It's not like just being happy. It's sort of deep, and you know it's a core happiness rather than just a simple um,
Fleeting,
fleeting
momentary.
laugh or something like that. Enjoy
Yeah,
your
very well
symptom. I
said.
like it.
Very well
Yeah.
said. It's so true. Everything about life is, but unfortunately, we lose perspective and we just look at it from a paper bills and a coin perspective, and we assign everything a monetary value, including our own abilities and who we are as humans. And I think that is, it's not necessary, and it leads to a lot of disillusioned professionals who are very, very smart and good at what they do, but also have the capacity to be truly in a joyful state, enjoy in a joyful state, and achieve that. I don't think it's something that can't be achieved together. So I hope whoever's listening really got that, or go back and listen to what Scott said about that, and or read his article when it comes out, because that's important. So fantastic. We'll look for that in July of 2022 in Plaintiff's Lawyer. And if you're already past July 22 and you're listening to this, go check out Plaintiff's Lawyer and read Scott's article. But there's more to you than just that, because as we know, no one's perfect. So what's a challenge on your plate that I can coach you through, or we can brainstorm together? What's going on in your world?
Oh God, just take your pick. I mean, um, let's see. I mean, there's so many, but what would be a good one to talk about today? Um, I think something that I'm wrestling with is that I'm wrestling with the word patience and impatience, and in this world which is a technology of speed. Uh, the lesson that I'm hearing from other attorneys is develop your practice over time. Let the legacy of your choices build like fractals, and good clients are going to come. But in the world of speed and technology, being that patient is very, very hard. And so, to me, one thing that we've worked on together, and I'd love to talk about today, is just your coaching on how to communicate your message in this particular world, um, and market yourself and brand yourself without doing yourself a disservice by being too impatient.
So
That is,
well said. That is a quandary I think we should all be looking at, including myself, because I don't want it to amount to a two by four, proverbial two by four that hits us in the head that slows us down. I think my listeners know by now, and Scott, obviously, that I had breast cancer last year, and that was my proverbial two by four. And I was the one that was always preaching this stuff. So it happens to all of us. I think the real answer is I'm looking at it from the other side of breast cancer, but truly you don't need the breast cancer to get to this point, is that you show up every day and you take that half an hour for yourself in the morning somewhere to say, what would I like to do and who would I like to be around?
mm-hmm,
And what kind of clients would I like is an offshoot question of that. And what kind of conversations would I like to have today? And who would I like to reach out to? And what aspect of myself would I like to cultivate? And none of that is social media related or technology related. We have to stay rooted in the foundation of our humanity, which is about the basics of one on one interaction. That's why I love that article you wrote, because it was about going to lunch with someone, and that took time and patience to cultivate that. And the result is this fantastic article that somebody else will publish that'll get traction and support your firm's growth and other people's growth, right? But you weren't looking at it from that perspective. You were just taking one tiny step at a time, right? Just like the fractal,
mm-hmm,
making one tiny decision at a time and doing what your heart told you to do, and the mind collaborated and said that's a good decision. So check in with your heart first, because when we check in with our mind, the left linear brain, we're going to go into impatience mode because we'll get overwhelmed by the choices that are out there. Should you work on SEO? Should you work on having someone post more for you out in social media? Should you have your own podcast? Like, all these thoughts are just too much. I find them too much. They're overwhelming. They not only stress me out and cause disease in my body, which I just refuse to be a victim of, right? Not that this experience left me as a victim, it was very enriching, but still. But just looking at our from our own perspective of, I'm going to do what I feel. I'm using that word on purpose. What I feel is emotionally sound for me, because that's what people receive and are receptive to. As you've heard me say many times, Scott, it's about the emotional resonance. Upward of 78% of everything that people buy is based on how they feel about us. Now, how is social media relaying that feeling? Okay, I mean, social media would tell you, oh, we capture all your emotions beautifully on social media and SEO and whatnot. I doubt it. It literally is one person at a time. And that really will test our patience. But I think
yeah,
flexing that muscle of sitting still and embracing that impatience and going, this is what impatience feels like. And I'm just going to sit with it
man,
and then
can I
sit
tell
with it.
you a 2-minute story that's perfect for this?
Absolutely.
Okay, this is a true story. It just happened. So I was basically in a I was in a lonely state. I was sitting in my apartment, feeling sorry for myself. I wanted to do something, but I didn't have anyone to do it with, and so I went on a dating app. Okay, uh, and so I get on it for the first time. Uh, Friday night, 7 o'clock. I open my little phone up. I see three pictures in. I see this woman. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. From one angle, maybe really ugly, but from another angle, maybe the most beautiful person you've ever seen in your life.
Okay.
My kind of person. And this woman's from France, and strange, and so I just write, um, you know, I want this compliment to sound okay, but you're otherworldly beautiful. I hope you have a good night. Um, that was it. I go to sleep. I wake up in the morning. I get a response. I said, "Oh, okay." The response is, "Scott, thank you so much for your compliment. I've been in the United States for 5 years. I haven't gotten a compliment like this once. In France, you can get a compliment at 8 in the morning at the buying bread, but definitely not from an American. So thank you." So I don't know, this is cool. So I respond back. I said, "Hey, I like to give compliments. I mean, I remember, in fact, 1997, I was in France when France won the World Cup, and I saw a woman, and I was writing a poem, and I said, you're incredibly beautiful. Thank you. Blah, blah, blah. I left my email on this poem. I gave it to her. I got an email back from that person. She said, "Scott, I'm in love with my boyfriend, but thank you very much for the compliment." I go play tennis. I come back and I open my phone and I get a message from this woman, and it says "stop" in all capital letters, exclamation point. And I represent victims of sexual assault. So my first response is, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I said, but I didn't mean any harm." And she said, "Where were you?" And I said, "I was near the Bastille. I was at an Algerian cafe that was, just an espresso tobacco shop." And she says, "That was me."
Oh, come on.
We met the next day for coffee here in Berkeley. She lives in Oakland now. She gave me the poem that I wrote with my name on it. Okay. And
Okay.
and and she just pushed it across the table and she said, "Thank you." She had that poem for 25 years. And even though we didn't have, chemistry as a couple together, it didn't matter because what we experienced together was perfect. And it was perfect for me. It was what I needed to hear and feel. And it's all about fractals. Like I, if you do something that feels right, the legacy of that decision will live on for many years down the road. It's something I'm trying to learn in my practice. It's just as if you do something really harmful to someone, that legacy lives too, and it's important to remember that too, all of us, including me. But for this time in my life, seeing that poem be pushed across the page that someone had carried with them to the United States and had in a book for 25 years, that was really special, and it made me feel like, this is a world capable of magic and growth and belief.
I want to just end it on that note with that story and that phrase you just said, because there's nothing to be said after that, except that this is the one time I wished we were recording the video so the listeners could see my mouth drop open. Three-quarters of the way through that story, I'm like, could that have been that woman? And I think it's going to make a great TV show or a TV movie or a Hallmark Channel movie. But the point really is that these miracles do happen. And I'm hoping that advice or my coaching was useful, because I think you took it and you really framed it out into that beautiful example, which is just perfect. Every day, start off by examining what works for you and your feelings. And if this is not meant to be mushy for those of you men, Scott is a very manly man, and you can't see him, but Google him, you'll find his picture. This is not about mushy emotions and girly things and feminine versus masculine. This is a human plight, and our human emotions are something you can't forget about. Marketers certainly don't forget about them. They market at us through our feelings. So taking into account your feelings every day and thinking about how would I like to show up in this moment and in the next moment allows you to stay present to life and really alive in the moment. And because of that decision, every moment thereafter is going to be the right one. And if you're like, well, that takes a lot of faith, it sure does. And I work on that every day because I am so not perfect, and it's not easy. It sounds simple, but it's not easy, just like anything else that's valuable in our lives. So I think that's the trick to patience versus impatience, in my opinion. I'm working on that. I evolve it as I go. But does that help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be sure for people listening, it wasn't the best deal, but in the interest of being a fiction writer, I'm protecting the privacy of all individuals. But
Oh,
regardless, thank you
uh,
so much for everything, Kati. Everything. I love what you do, and yeah, everybody who's worked with you, I'm sure, has the same response to your practice. It's really incredible, and thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you for being my guest and for educating the audience so well. I really appreciate your kind words and your trust and faith as a former client. Where can we find you? If someone's listening and wants to get in touch with you or learn more about your practice, more about your writing, just more about Scott, how can they contact you? And I'll put it in the show notes, but let us know, please.
So my website is scottherndonlaw.com. Herndon's like Hernandez, Herdon, and it's just my first name, Scott at scottherndonlaw.com. And yeah, happy to talk to anybody with a good heart.
That's a very well said response. And who wouldn't be happy to talk to anyone with a good heart? Thanks for being my guest. I really appreciate your wisdom. We all do. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And like I said, I could sit for hours and just watch you take a topic and just expand upon it. I think it's fantastic. And for my guests, I hope you take what we talked about today and really spin it on its head. Look at it from your own perspective, because you're not Scott, you're not me. We don't want you to be us. You are you, and that's special, and that's a unique brand, and you deserve the time and energy to stop and look at your life from this perspective and think, what of this can I apply in my own way to make my life effective, to make my career effective, to make the world around me effective? And by effective, I mean living into your full self, having joy in your life, and being a success, whether that means money, fame, fortune, whatever works for you works for us, as long as you're evolving, you're growing, and you're moving on to your next success. So thank you, everyone, and until next time, Ketichi out.